Celeste, the blue-eyed slave who drowned the colonel in hot lard. The colonel screamed in terror as his body was submerged in the vat of boiling lard, the echoes of pain tearing through the silence of the plantation like thunder in the heart of the night. The kitchen, lit only by the fire from the wood stove, became the stage for an unthinkable scene. A young slave woman, with dark skin and intense blue eyes, stood before him with a cold, determined gaze, the flames dancing in her reflection. But who was this woman who dared to face the most feared man in Charleston? To understand this story, we must go back a few hours, when the Whitaker plantation still seemed peaceful, lit by flickering lamps, with crickets chirping and the crack of whips reminding everyone that in those days black lives were treated as commodities. Celeste, scarred by years of abuse, walked in silence, but in her eyes there was something no one dared to look at, a gleam of resistance. That night, she would no longer be a victim, and as darkness covered the plantation, a secret was about to be born, a secret bathed in fire and blood. But before continuing, check if you're already subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any detail. The plantation where Celeste lived was located on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina, one of the richest and cruelest cities in the southern United States in the 18th century. Known as Whitaker Plantation, the property spanned hundreds of acres covered in cotton and rice fields, surrounded by swamps that exuded a damp, heavy smell. The main house, built in the colonial style, with large white columns at the entrance and wooden windows painted dark green, stood in the center of the plantation as a symbol of absolute power. Around it, small houses of rotting wood housed families of enslaved people who lived crowded together in inhumane conditions, while the plantation's wealth grew through the blood of their bodies. The dirt road leading to the main house was lined with centuries-old oak trees draped in Spanish moss, which seemed to silently observe the pain that unfolded there day after day. Celeste was only 19, but the weight of her existence seemed much greater. Her shiny black skin, which glistened under the scorching southern sun, bore invisible marks that spoke louder than words. Her rare blue eyes, inherited from generations of rape and violence, were like two sparks amid the darkness of slavery. Many masters saw her as a curiosity, something exotic, as if her color were a spectacle. To Colonel Jonathan Whitaker, the plantation owner, she was a prized possession, not a person. Jonathan Whitaker was a feared man throughout Charleston. A veteran of the Revolutionary War, he returned to the city as an arrogant and cruel landowner. He was known for disciplining his slaves with exemplary punishments, and the Whitaker plantation was known for its bountiful produce, but also for the screams that echoed into the night. To him, Celeste was nothing more than a rare jewel, displayed before visitors like a trophy reflecting the power of House Whitaker. "Look at those eyes, rare as sapphires," he would say with a cold smile, as she kept her head down, struggling to hide the hatred that burned within. From a young age, Celeste knew the weight of chains. Orphaned at 7, she vaguely remembered her mother's voice singing African chants as she braided her hair. These memories were her only refuge on the days she was dragged to the barn to be punished. The Whitaker farm was a cruel world, and she was a pawn on this board of pain. Despite her youth, her thin, scarred body already bore scars on her back, the result of whippings that bled until they stained the sand of the yard. The plantation routine began before sunrise. Celeste worked in the kitchen, which kept her close to the main house, but far from any security. It was there, amidst iron cauldrons and the smell of salted meat, that she heard the laughter of the colonel's guests as she carried heavy trays. "Faster, girl," the other slaves would say, fearing reprisals. Celeste rarely spoke. Her strength lay in her silence, but her eyes betrayed the flame that grew day by day. Whitaker had a presence that made the kitchen air heavy. He would appear unannounced, his boots soiled with mud, his whip hanging from his belt, a constant reminder of who was in charge. He touched whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and Celeste was his primary victim. "You're special, girl, and I'm the only one who can appreciate it," he would whisper, holding her tightly by the arm as she stifled tears and looked away. Those words echoed in her mind long after he left, leaving only the smell of rum and gunpowder in the air. The plantation, despite its opulence, had a prison-like atmosphere. The large white house with wide verandas contrasted with the fragile huts of the enslaved people. In the distance, the Ashley River reflected the golden light of dusk. But for Celeste, that beautiful landscape was a cage. She knew that trying to escape meant death, and so she learned to survive intelligently. She observed routines, memorized details, and listened to whispered conversations. Her blue gaze, which to the masters was merely a whim of nature, hid an attentive mind that memorized every step, every unlocked door, every weakness of the colonel. Celeste lived in silence, but there was a scream trapped inside her, a scream that came from every raped slave, every man whipped to death, every child sold in the markets of Charleston. In the colonel's eyes, she was a rare ornament, but deep down beneath the scars and forced obedience, Celeste was a bomb waiting to explode. If this part of the story has already made you feel anger or empathy for Celeste, leave a like to support this woman who has suffered so much. Jonathan Whittaker was 45 years old and carried an aura of power that seemed to weigh down everyone he approached. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with fair skin and a cold gaze, with an air of authority that never needed explaining, only feeling. His brown hair, already streaked with grey, was always slicked back, and his thin moustache was meticulously trimmed. His preferred uniform was a red coat, a legacy from his service as an officer in the American War of Independence, where he built a reputation as a ruthless strategist. On the plantation, this coat wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a symbol, always. Accompanied by his polished black leather boots, his whip hung at his belt, not as a tool, but as a silent warning. Nicknamed the Wolf of Charleston, Jonathan was feared even by other landowners, who admired his coolness and his ability to keep hundreds of enslaved people under control with a blend of brutality and psychology. For the black men working in the fields, the mere sight of him on horseback was enough to make their hearts race. For the women, his presence spelled fear. His deep voice was too calm, carrying an implicit threat. "Here, everyone knows their place, and I make sure they never forget," he would say, stroking the whip through his hands, as if caressing a precious weapon. Whittaker didn't just punish. Humiliation was an essential part of his method. He believed that breaking the spirit of enslaved people was more effective than any chain. He liked to make public examples, gathering everyone in the dirt yard to watch brutal punishments. "Look closely," he commanded, his wide-brimmed hat shading his cold eyes. "Let this body remind each of you the price of disobedience." His words were accompanied by the crack of the whip, a sound that echoed like thunder, cutting through the heavy silence of the plantation mornings. Many slaves said the sound of the leather slapping the air was worse than the blow itself, for it announced the pain before it even arrived. Celeste was his favorite property, and that description was never a source of pride, but rather of terror. Whittaker treated her like a rare trophy, a possession he would proudly display before visitors. "Look at that, blue eyes. A gift of nature mixed with the power of the white man," he would comment as he made her kneel before friends and merchants. She was nothing more than a grotesque display to reinforce his status. At night, however, this admiration turned into a private torment. He took pleasure in reminding her, in venomous whispers, that she lived only because he wanted, and her too. "You are mine, Celeste, my masterpiece," he would say, gripping her chin tightly, forcing her to look at him. Jonathan not only ruled the plantation with an iron fist, but also cultivated a reputation in the town. He was a respected man among Charleston's wealthy, known for his wealth, his cotton and rice production, and his ability to maintain order on a property with over 200 enslaved people. However, behind the elegant dinners and social gatherings, he was a shadow that prowled like a predator. His obsession with control extended to every detail of the plantation. Schedules were timed, routines rigidly followed, and any failure was punished with violence. The walls of the manor house held the darkest secrets. Many enslaved women avoided looking him in the eye, trying to become invisible, but Jonathan had a strange predilection for those who most feared his presence. Celeste, her blue eyes shining in the lamplight, became his favorite prey. To him, that blend of beauty, youth, and fear was fascinating. To her, it was a sentence of constant suffering. He would often enter the kitchen where Celeste worked silently. The sound of his boots echoing on the wooden floor was enough to silence everyone. "Leave it, girl. I want to talk to you," he would say, quietly but firmly, as she set down the pots and pans, her fingers trembling. With each visit, a chill ran down the spines of the other slaves, who looked away, fearing for her and for themselves. Jonathan didn't scream to demonstrate power. He didn't need to. His control came from the calm with which he meted out each punishment, the precision with which he manipulated fear. This coldness made him all the more dangerous. At dinner parties, over glasses of wine and expensive cigars, he liked to tell war stories, describing battles with a frightening ease, as if talking about deaths were merely a memory of past adventures. For him, pain was an instrument of order, and the Whitaker farm was his kingdom, maintained under a regime of calculated terror. Jonathan Whitaker wasn't just a cruel slave master, he was the living portrait of a society built on blood, a man who could smile at the town's wealthy, and in the same day whip to death any worker who dared to rest. Celeste knew well that cold gaze, that smile that never reached his eyes. She knew that to him she was nothing more than a rare jewel, a beautiful object that could be admired, used, and broken. But behind the fear, inspired, something was being born in Celeste that Jonathan would never perceive, a silent strength that grew with every unwanted touch, every humiliation, every cruel smile. And this strength was about to change the fate of the Whitaker plantation forever. Did Jonathan Whitaker's cruelty revolt you? Write in the comments. Nobody forgets the pain, and let's show that stories like Celeste's deserve to be remembered. The Whitaker plantation on that rainy night seemed shrouded in a heavy atmosphere, as if even the wind sensed the evil lurking within the manor house. The sound of rain falling on the tin roof mingled with the echo of laughter and animated conversation among the powerful men gathered in the main hall. Candelabras illuminated the room, reflecting the gleam of gold and silver that decorated the room, while slaves hurried about with trays of wine and expensive dishes. It was into this setting that Celeste, just 19 years old, was summoned. Her bare feet stomped against the cold floor, her heart pounding, and each step echoed within her like a harbinger of what was to come. As she walked through the ballroom doors, all conversation ceased for a moment. The eyes of the guests, farmers, influential merchants, even local politicians, turned to her as if she were an exotic object on display. Colonel Jonathan Whitaker, seated in the red velvet armchair, a glass of rum in his hand, smiled with that look of contempt only he could carry. "Gentlemen, enjoy," he said, loudly, drawing out each word with sickening pleasure. And without ceremony, in a cold, calculated gesture, he grabbed Celeste's simple dress and ripped it violently, exposing her to everyone. Muffled laughter and lewd glances filled the room. One of the men, holding a cigar, chuckled softly. "Blue eyes, like a rare jewel, Whitaker. You really know how to choose." Celeste kept her head down, feeling the heat of shame rise through her body. But in her eyes, tears mingled with hatred. At that moment, something inside her broke. It wasn't just shame or fear. It was as if a part of her, still insisting on surviving in silence, had died. In the void that remained, something stronger was born, a thirst for justice. If she was going to die, she would die fighting, and she would take that man with her. In the following days, Celeste returned to her work in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Her face was serene, but her heart beat faster, fueled by the memory of that night. The colonel, pleased with her display, believed he had shattered any remaining pride she had. What he didn't know was that every forced smile and submissive gesture hid a plan taking shape. Celeste began to pay attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. The exact time the colonel left the dining room to drink alone, the least guarded paths in the house, the changing times of the guards, and even the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Her mind, previously occupied solely with survival, now worked like that of a silent strategist. Working in the kitchen, Celeste had access to everything: sharp knives, heavy pots, and most importantly, huge cauldrons of boiling lard used to prepare meats. She began to pay special attention to that hot oil. Each time she stirred it with the wooden spoon, she watched the bubbling surface and felt a strange sense of power. In that pot, which seemed harmless to everyone else, she saw the possibility of freedom. Little by little, she began to set aside a dedicated pot, claiming it was for the colonel's special recipes. No one suspected. Celeste became a discreet shadow in the kitchen. Her gaze, once striking because of its blue color, now seemed empty, as if she had given up the fight. This pretense gave her the perfect cover. "That girl has learned to put herself in her place," one of the older maids commented, unaware of what was coming. Celeste didn't respond, just nodded, cultivating an image of absolute obedience. She knew that for Whitaker, nothing was more satisfying than seeing a broken soul. That was her advantage. The nights were the hardest. As she washed the utensils, Celeste relived the moment she was displayed like a piece of decoration before her guests. She could feel their laughter still echoing in her mind, the colonel's hand on her shoulder, his gaze as cold as ice. Silently she whispered to herself, "One day, Jonathan Whitaker, one day, you will feel what you made us all feel." These words became a mantra, repeated every time she stirred the pot of boiling lard. The plan became more solid with each passing day. Celeste began creating small opportunities to test the guards' patience, observing how they moved around the house. She noticed that the colonel, on party nights, tended to drink too much and preferred her to accompany him to the meat locker, an area away from the main room. Knowing this, Celeste planned every detail: the route she would take, where she would hide the makeshift rope, how to keep the pot hot enough without attracting attention. She knew she only had one chance. If she failed, death would be slow and public. But for Celeste, dying trying would be better than continuing to live under the hands of the man who had turned her life into a nightmare. Each morning, as the sun rose over the cotton fields, she took a deep breath and told herself she was one step closer. No one noticed her determination. To others, she was just another defeated woman, a shadow carrying trays and cleaning floors. To her, each tray served was a piece on the board, each pot stirred was a weapon being prepared. In the kitchen, Celeste felt at home. It was her territory, the only place where she could be relatively alone. There, amidst the strong smell of grease and the constant heat of the stove, she planned every move. She began keeping the pot of boiling oil closer to the wall, hidden by other utensils. At the end of the day, she spent more time than necessary cleaning the space, making sure no one suspected her special pot. She became a master at hiding her intentions. Jonathan, on the other hand, was increasingly convinced that he had complete control over her. "You're quieter, Celeste, just the way I like it," he said one night, gripping her chin tightly. She didn't respond, just lowered her eyes, allowing him to believe he had finally won. In reality, Celeste was winning. Her silence was armor, her calm a slow poison, and each bubble that burst on the surface of the Boiling oil seemed to whisper to her, "The time is coming." Did this part leave you heavy-hearted or angry? Tell us in the comments what you felt reading this scene. It was a night of celebration at the Whitaker plantation. The cotton harvest had been bountiful that year, and the mansion was lit up like never before. Chandeliers flickered, lamps cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls, and the smell of expensive wine and roast meats filled the air. It was a festive Wednesday, with soft music, played in the background by an enslaved man at the piano, and laughter echoed throughout the hall. Landlords, influential merchants, and even local dignitaries were present. Everyone toasted prosperity, while the enslaved people circulated the hall, pouring glasses and clearing dishes with neutral expressions and lowered gazes. Celeste worked silently, carrying heavy trays, her head covered by a simple scarf. Her serene expression hid a whirlwind of emotions. She moved around the room with firm steps, collecting empty plates, refilling glasses, but her blue eyes were attentive to every detail. The number of glasses of rum the colonel had drunk, the time the guests began to say goodbye, the sound of the horses being led out. That night, Jonathan Whitaker laughed louder than usual. The wine had made his posture even more arrogant, and the men accompanying him treated him like a king. But Celeste knew that behind that smile lay a predator waiting to hunt her again. As the wall clock struck 10, the party drew to a close. One by one, the guests began to leave, carrying with them the smell of tobacco and the muffled sound of business conversations. The once vibrant mansion fell into an eerie silence. Only the crackling of the flames in the fireplace and the sound of the light rain outside filled the air. Celeste remained in the dining room, gathering the last of the silverware, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the tablecloths. The colonel sat at the head of the table, his face flushed from the alcohol, his eyes half closed but still full of authority. "Celeste," he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence, "walk me to the meat locker." She knew exactly what that meant. Her legs trembled for a second, but she took a deep breath, swallowing the fear that gnawed at her. She bowed her head in obedience and answered softly, "Yes, sir." She followed him through the dark hallways of the house, the sound of his boots echoing heavily on the wooden floor. The lamp he carried gave just enough light to cast his tall, menacing shadow on the walls, a warning of what was to come. Celeste walked with silent steps, her hands hidden under her apron, where she kept the wooden handle she had hidden hours before. When they reached the warehouse door, Jonathan unlocked the lock with a set of keys and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The cold smell of smoked and salted meats filled the air, mingling with the metallic aroma of hooks hanging from the ceiling. He entered first, setting the lamp down on a wooden table in the corner, and turned to face Celeste, with that cynical smile she knew well. "Close the door," he ordered. She obeyed, but the instant his back was turned, Celeste grabbed the club hidden under her apron, and with all the strength pent up from years of humiliation, brought it down on his head. The dull thud echoed through the warehouse. Jonathan staggered, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the wooden floor with a low groan. Celeste was breathing heavily, her heart racing, her sweaty hands trembling as they gripped the club. But there was no time to hesitate. She knew she had to act fast. With effort, she dragged the colonel's heavy body down the hallway, the sound of his boots scraping against the floor. The silence of the mansion made each step more intense, each creak of the wooden floor resounding like thunder in her ears. She moved with a grim determination, driven by hatred and pent-up pain. Reaching the kitchen, she pushed open the door with her shoulder and quickly tied his arms with ropes she had prepared days earlier. Jonathan, still groggy, groaned softly, trying to regain consciousness. Celeste pulled out a pitcher of cold water and poured it over his face. The colonel opened his eyes, blinking rapidly in confusion. When he realized where he was, sitting on the kitchen floor, tied up, his head throbbing, his expression changed from surprise to anger. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" he growled hoarsely. He tried to move, but the ropes were too tight. Celeste didn't answer. She remained silent, watching as he struggled. Beside him, the wood-burning stove kept a large pot of lard simmering, and the steam slowly rose, filling the kitchen with a heavy smell. The colonel followed her gaze, and when he saw the pot bubbling, his face hardened. Fear appeared in his eyes, something Celeste had never seen before. "Celeste," he began, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "Let me go now and I'll forget about this. You don't know who you're dealing with." She stepped forward, her blue eyes fixed on him. The contrast between the calm on her face and his desperation made the air in the kitchen seem heavier. The colonel began to struggle harder, the chair creaking under his weight. "You'll regret this. You'll die for this girl," he shouted, but his voice trembled, betraying the panic that grew by the second. Celeste remained silent, just walking slowly toward the stove. She picked up a long ladle and dipped it into the boiling lard, lifting it slowly, letting the scalding oil drip back into the cauldron. Jonathan's eyes widened, sweat pouring down his face. "Don't do this. I gave you everything, food, clothing. You owe me obedience." His voice was now filled with desperation. She tilted her head slightly, watching him with eerie calm. Flashes of all the abuse she had suffered flashed through her mind like nightmares, his hand gripping, her arm tightly, the laughter of the guests as she was exposed, the whip cracking on the backs of innocent men, the cries of the women being taken away. It was all there, condensed into that moment. The colonel pulled at the ropes, his neck muscles straining, trying to free himself. The sound of bubbling oil filled the air, making the room stifling. Celeste set the ladle aside and approached, bending down to his level. "Today, Colonel, you're the one who's afraid," she whispered, her voice low, but firm. He held his breath, his wide eyes reflecting the flame from the stove. For once, Jonathan Whittaker wasn't the predator, he was the prey. The tension in the kitchen was almost palpable. The sound of rain beating against the windows, the crackle of burning logs, and the colonel's muffled screams created a scene of terror. Celeste slowly got up, walked to the door, and locked it, making sure no one would enter. She returned to the cauldron, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Jonathan was panting, his face flushed with anger and fear. "You're not getting out of this alive," he said in a thin voice, but Celeste just stared at him with disturbing serenity. That moment was the culmination of years of pain, humiliation, and silence. And for the first time, silence wasn't submission, it was power. Would you have the courage to do what Celeste did? Colonel Jonathan Whittaker, bound and sweating, could feel the heat of the wood-burning stove searing his skin before he even touched the pot of boiling lard. The kitchen, lit only by the glow of the fire, resembled a courtroom scene. The only judge was Celeste, who stood before him, gripping the handle of the cauldron with firm hands. Her blue eyes, which had so commanded attention and desire, now reflected only a deep, unwavering hatred. Jonathan realized this was no act. She was unafraid. There was no hesitation. For the first time, he felt dread. "Listen, girl, we can talk," he said hoarsely, trying to maintain authority. "I give you your freedom. I give you gold. You can leave, disappear, but get me out of here now." The words sounded more like pleas than orders. He thrashed in his chair, the leather of his boot belt creaking as he pulled at the ropes binding his arms. But Celeste said nothing. Her lips curved in a faint smile, cold, without a trace of humor. The colonel knew in that instant that bargaining would not work. Celeste stepped forward, leaning close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath. "Do you really think I'd believe that?" she whispered with disturbing calm. "I know if I let go of you, I won't see the sunrise." The colonel swallowed, trying to keep his expression steady, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Seeing that his negotiation was failing, Jonathan lost his mask of civility and let his hatred speak louder. "Stupid Creole," he spat with contempt. "You'll never be anyone." I'll do with you whatever I want, whenever I want. It's always been that way, and it always will be." His voice echoed through the kitchen, filled with venom. But Celeste just laughed softly, a dry laugh that sounded like an omen. With a sudden movement, she pushed the chair closer to the stove. The colonel felt the intense heat from the lard cauldron rise up his body and screamed, trying to pull away. "Stop it, you wretch!" Celeste didn't respond. She grabbed the handle of the pan and tilted it slightly, letting drops of boiling oil splash onto the floor. The sound of the oil sizzling against the wood made Jonathan squirm even more. "You're going to die from this," she yelled, but her voice trembled, revealing the fear that grew with each passing second. Celeste bent down until her face was close to his. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with a fury he'd never seen before. "I've died many times, Colonel," she said softly, "but today, you're the one who will." In one decisive move, she shoved Jonathan with all her strength into the vat of boiling lard. The scream that escaped her throat was so high-pitched it echoed throughout the mansion, shattering the heavy silence of the night. The sound of flesh meeting scalding oil was accompanied by a thick, unbearable smell that quickly spread throughout the room. Jonathan struggled, screaming in pain, but there was no escape. Celeste pulled away, watching with a cold gaze as he writhed, the fire illuminating the terror in his eyes. The kitchen was like hell, and tonight Jonathan Whittaker finally experienced the same suffering he had inflicted on so many others. Outside, the dogs began barking, and Foreman ran toward the main house. The sound of the colonel's desperate screams served as a guide, but when they broke down the kitchen door, silence had already reigned. All they found was the boss's body submerged in the cauldron, his face unrecognizable, the chair overturned on the floor, and the nauseating smell of burning fat. Celeste was no longer there. She had fled through the back door minutes earlier, carrying only her headscarf and a courage that burned brighter than any fire. She ran through the wet woods, the rain mixing with the sweat streaming down her face, but without looking back. The men's shouts echoed through the farm, calling to her, promising revenge, but nothing else mattered. The darkness of the forest was her new ally. As the overseers searched the house for clues, the young blue-eyed slave became a shadow in the night. Every step she took was a break from the chains that had bound her entire life. The Whittaker plantation would never forget that night. Celeste's name would be whispered among the slaves as a living legend, the woman who faced down the most feared man in Charleston and brought him down single-handedly with fire and courage. The kitchen that had once been the scene of her suffering was now the scene of justice. Jonathan Whittaker, the Wolf of Charleston, was dead, and his own arrogance had paved the way for his downfall. Celeste disappeared into the woods, but her blue eyes and her story would remain in the memory of all who heard her screams that night. For the enslaved, she hadn't fled just to save herself. She had done what many dreamed, but didn't dare. Prove that even the most powerful bleed. But now what? What would she do? To find out, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell because there's still much to discover here. Celeste disappeared that same night. The kitchen fire ignited the terror in the Whittaker mansion. Some swear she ran into the woods and hid in the humid swamps of South Carolina, where secret maroons sheltered fugitives. Others believe she followed the Ashley River, walking for days and nights, nourished only by roots and hope, until she reached a network of abolitionists who helped her reach the North, where she would finally live in freedom. But the truth is, no one ever saw her again. Her image, that of the blue-eyed slave who transformed a kitchen into a courtroom and a cauldron into an instrument of justice, became legend. In the slave quarters, Celeste's name began to be whispered like a talisman. The women spoke of her as they sewed clothes under the dim light of the lamps, and the men, as they picked cotton under the scorching sun, exchanged knowing glances as they remembered her courage. To the masters, Celeste was merely a savage criminal who betrayed the man who sheltered her. To the enslaved, she was a flame that ignited hope. Each of the colonel's screams that Night echoed through the hearts of the chained men, reminding them that even the most feared could fall. The legend grew, spanning generations. Children born years later heard the stories told by grandparents who swore they saw the glow of Celeste's eyes reflected in the kitchen fire. Some said she still lived hidden in the swamps, watching over other fugitives like an invisible guardian. Others claimed she had crossed entire states, living as a free woman in a distant city, but that she never forgot the plantation that had shaped her. This uncertainty only fueled the myth. Celeste had ceased to be just a woman and had become a symbol, but behind the legend lay a brutal reality. In the 18th century, stories like hers were common, though rarely documented. Enslaved people were beaten, abused, and sold as commodities. Their families were separated without warning, their identities deliberately erased. Resistance was not only difficult, it was considered an unforgivable crime, punishable by death. Celeste's courage was not just an act of personal revenge, it was a silent revolt against a system that turned human beings into property. By pushing Jonathan Whittaker into the cauldron, she not only brought justice to herself, but to every scream that echoed in the Whittaker plantation yard, to every tear shed in the darkness of the slave quarters. This kind of story was rarely written in books. The official narrative of the time treated such acts as savagery, hiding the truth that many of these savage acts were cries of desperation and humanity. Celeste had no weapons, no allies, no freedom, but she had courage. In a single night, she became a legend, and her story began to be told not with ink, but with fear among white people and hope among black people. The violence that shaped this period left deep scars that spanned generations. Slaves who survived the whip, hunger, and abuse bore not only physical scars, but also traumas that shaped entire communities. Celeste's story is one of the few that survived oblivion because it was too shocking to be erased. It wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a living reminder that even in the most brutal conditions, the flame of resistance never went out. Imagine living every day with the certainty that your life doesn't belong to you, that your body can be used and discarded at any moment. Imagine seeing families destroyed, hearing children cry as they're sold like cattle, feeling the weight of chains on their ankles. Now imagine what it meant to these people to know that a young woman alone had faced one of the most powerful men in the American South and won. Celeste was a cry for freedom in the form of fire, a whisper that justice could exist, even if in her own way. Today, her story serves as a brutal reminder of the reality of slavery. When we hear Celeste's name, we remember not only the woman who disappeared in the darkness of that night, we remember all the others who had no voice, all the bodies that could never seek revenge, all the lives that were erased without record. She represents the cry of an entire generation, a symbol of the strength that endures even in the most inhumane conditions. Celeste was not just a slave, she was a cry of despair in the form of fire. These words echo like a scar in the collective memory. Her story isn't just entertainment, it's a call to action to remember the past. It's a reminder that today's freedom was built on tears and blood, and that every forgotten name deserves to be remembered. And you, what would you do in Celeste's place? This story deserves to resonate forever. If it's captivated you this far, write in the comments, "Justice for Celeste." Let's spread this memory that history books have tried to erase. Click on the video on the screen now and immerse yourself in another chilling story that will completely change your perspective on the past.